Before proceeding, viewers are advised to exercise caution. The following is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is a verbatim reproduction of testimony in federal court in the case of Sean Diddy Combs, as reported by Inner City Press. The courtroom was packed. The walls echoed with the buzz of conversation, the rustling of papers, and the quiet sighs of nervous witnesses. People looked at each other with interest, exchanged guesses, and waited for the main event to begin. The air was thick with tension and anticipation, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to unfold. The lights flickered slightly, and the cameras pointed at the podium blinked, ready to capture every word. When Mark Halperin entered the hall, his presence immediately drew everyone's attention. He walked calmly and confidently, as if carrying some kind of heavy secret. A sudden silence fell over everyone. No one dared even whisper. It was clear that people felt they were about to hear something that would change the course of the entire proceedings. Everyone expected the usual proceedings, with the usual speeches, formal questions, and standard flow of information. But the atmosphere changed dramatically as soon as Mark Halperin, a former FBI agent, took the stand. His professional experience and authority were immediately apparent. His appearance instantly plunged the room into a tense silence. Everyone present felt that something important, perhaps even shocking, was about to happen. Halperin began his testimony calmly, but with firm conviction. He stated that the investigation into Diddy Combs was not just another scandal that would soon be forgotten. No, he said, it was much deeper than that. Behind it was an entire system of protection, carefully constructed and operating at the highest levels of the U.S. government. Mark emphasized that the case was not just about one individual, but about a complex network of influence and patronage. And then he named a name that surprised everyone: Barack Obama. For many, he was a symbol of hope and change, a man who promised honesty and justice. But Halperin claimed that it was Obama who was connected to this protective system covering for Diddy Combs. This information blew the room away. People did not expect to hear such loud accusations, especially against a former president. Agent Halperin gave a detailed account of the FBI's long-standing surveillance of Diddy Combs and his business empire, which lasted more than 20 years. It all began in the late 1990s, when the first warning signs began to appear in Combs' work. These signs included complex financial transactions that did not match official reports, lavish parties attended by shady individuals and influential criminal groups. In addition, links were uncovered to shell companies registered abroad, which appeared to be used for money laundering and concealing illegal activities. Each of these episodes seemed isolated and not particularly serious at first glance, but together they formed a whole network of shady connections and secrets. The agent emphasized that from the very beginning of the investigation, they encountered systematic resistance. As the FBI got closer to uncovering the schemes, strange and suspicious events occurred. Important evidence suddenly disappeared without a trace. Key witnesses either stopped communicating or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Moreover, FBI employees who showed excessive interest in the case and pushed the investigation forward were unexpectedly transferred to other less significant positions or dismissed altogether under unclear pretexts. This did not appear to be a coincidence. Everything pointed to someone high up in the government carefully controlling the situation to stop the investigation and keep large-scale violations secret. Halperin hinted that these forces were so influential that they were able to manipulate even the FBI itself, turning the agency from a crime fighter into something resembling a cover for illegal schemes. In 2001, a major international operation was organized to combat money laundering, involving front companies closely linked to Diddy Combs. This operation was supposed to deal a serious blow to his financial schemes and expose the extent of his illegal activities. However, despite the evidence gathered and the requests for search and arrest warrants prepared, everything suddenly came to a halt. Agent Halperin acknowledged that the case had gone far beyond a routine investigation. All attempts to move forward were blocked at the highest levels. Requests for warrants and arrest warrants were rejected without apparent reason or with flimsy excuses. According to him, this was clearly not a coincidence, but the result of interference by federal authorities. The decision came directly from Washington, from those with the power and influence to stop the investigation. This meant that the Diddy Combs case was not just a criminal story, but part of a much broader and more complex political game involving the country's most influential players. The agent hinted that it was this interference that explained why the case never went to trial, and why all attempts to get closer to the truth had failed. The prosecution then presented a detailed timeline of events that showed how the investigation into Diddy Combs had been systematically blocked for a long time from 1999 to 2013. During this period, every time serious allegations arose, whether it was human trafficking, fraud, corruption, or other serious crimes, the case seemed to hit an invisible wall. Instead of moving forward, investigations were either suddenly closed without explanation, or key figures involved in the case were released from custody despite compelling evidence. Sometimes judges made strange decisions, and charges were dropped or postponed. It all looked like a carefully orchestrated scheme to cover up real crimes and protect powerful people. When the prosecution presented this timeline, the courtroom fell silent. The jury, witnesses, and the public were shocked. It seemed incredible that powerful forces could have so skillfully controlled and manipulated the justice system for so many years. This led many to wonder, if all this is true, how deep does the corruption go? And who is really behind all this protection? Particularly sensational was the statement made by Agent Halperin about the events of 2003. He said that it was then that Diddy Combs acquired his so-called unofficial protection, a kind of shield provided by his status as an informant. But not just an informant, but one whose status was authorized and confirmed by only 3 very high-ranking figures in the federal government. This meant that the protection was not only powerful but also strictly secret, accessible only to a select few. Halperin emphasized that this protection made any serious prosecution of Combs impossible, despite all the suspicions and accusations. This was not just a criminal case, it was a game of political and power interests, where crimes were covered up from above. The agent linked this protection system directly to Diddy's own political connections, which extended all the way to the White House. According to him, among those who provided this protective shield was Barack Obama, a man who for many represented a symbol of change and honesty, but in this case acted as part of a complex and dark network of influence. This statement caused an uproar in the courtroom. It became clear that this was not just a case of fraud or crime, but a system where politics and crime were intertwined in the most complicated way, and where at the top of this system were people with power and the ability to cover up any violations. Agent Halperin proceeded to present evidence and showed photographs of Diddy Combs together with Barack Obama at various events. These photos included not only public meetings and official ceremonies, but also closed meetings with influential lobby groups, where only those closest to them were usually allowed. According to Halperin, these photos were not just random moments when 2 influential people happened to be in the same place. He claimed that there were much more serious and secret agreements behind these meetings. According to him, Combs actively exchanged intelligence and insider information with members of Obama's election campaign team. In return, he received powerful political protection that helped him avoid criminal prosecution and block investigations. This explained why, despite clear evidence of illegal activity, Combs' case remained virtually untouched for many years. The agent emphasized that such connections testify to a deep and dangerous interdependence between criminal structures and political elites, where personal interests are often placed above the law and justice. In 2009, the FBI took a significant step in the investigation by filing official requests to wiretap Combs' phone calls with suspected drug traffickers. This was an important attempt to gather direct evidence that could shed light on his involvement in criminal schemes and push the case toward real charges. However, contrary to investigators' expectations, the wiretap request was unexpectedly denied. Agent Halperin noted that it was during this period that the White House legal team was involved, which allegedly officially revoked the wiretap authorization. This meant that the interference came from the highest levels of government, not just bureaucratic red tape, but a deliberate action designed to stop the investigation. According to Halperin, this episode is clear evidence that the Diddy Combs case was protected not only by political connections, but also by direct influence on government structures. Such interference showed how deeply this system of protection had penetrated, turning even federal investigative agencies into hostages to external pressure and political games. Agent Halperin continued his testimony, revealing even more details about Diddy Combs' connections. He said that Combs regularly attended private charity dinners that brought together not just rich and influential people, but the real elite, including politicians, businessmen, and public figures. Among these events, dinners attended by Barack Obama and well-known activist Al Sharpton attracted particular attention. According to the agent, these meetings were far from ordinary social events. They were held in a strictly closed format, and the invited guests included not only official representatives of the authorities but also people with criminal pasts, as well as representatives of intelligence agencies. This created a complex and ambiguous atmosphere where the interests of politics, business, and shadowy forces intersected. Halperin emphasized that these dinners were not just for raising money for charity, but were a place to talk about strategic issues, share info, and build relationships between different players in politics and crime. Combs' participation in these events explained how he maintained his protection and influence despite numerous accusations and investigations. Agent Halperin recounted specific cases in which the police arrested Diddy Combs' closest associates on serious charges, including human trafficking, drug distribution, and other serious crimes. These arrests appeared to be significant successes for law enforcement, and it seemed that real progress would finally be made in the case. But then something strange happened. Just 2 days after the arrests, all the case files were suddenly classified, and the suspects were unexpectedly released from custody. These actions were clearly not accidental. Powerful forces were at work influencing the course of the investigations. The agent emphasized that this process was accompanied by frequent phone calls from the Capitol, the center of power in Washington, where key decisions were made. According to him, these calls and interventions were deliberate. Investigations were deliberately curtailed, evidence disappeared, and justice remained out of reach for those who stood in the way of Diddy Combs and his influential network. All of this served as proof of how deep political influence had penetrated and how high the shields protecting criminal activity had been raised. In 2015, the FBI focused its attention on Diddy Combs' movements in the Caribbean. Agent Halperin said that during this period, Combs regularly attended closed-door meetings with financiers closely linked to notorious drug cartels. These meetings were not just business meetings. They were accompanied by lavish parties that, according to the investigation, were of a highly questionable nature. Particularly shocking to the jury was the presence of underage girls at these events. Officially, their participation was said to be related to auditions and show preparation, but the investigation pointed to much darker motives and possible exploitation. This information caused a real upheaval in the perception of the case. It seemed that Combs was not just involved in crime, but was running a network intertwined with drug trafficking and human abuse. The information presented by the agent caused a strong shock among the jury. It became clear to many that they were not dealing with a mere criminal, but with a figure whose actions touched the lowest and most dangerous aspects of society. While being protected by the highest authorities, Agent Halperin spoke about the existence of secret video recordings that had been made since 2003 using hidden cameras installed in Diddy Combs' homes. These cameras recorded everything, not just everyday life, but compromising scenes involving famous celebrities and influential politicians. According to the agent, many of these people were under clear coercion or blackmail, which made them dependent on Combs and allowed him to maintain control. In 2016, the FBI attempted to seize these videos as key evidence. However, when agents entered the server room, a fire suddenly broke out, destroying most of the recordings, which was a serious blow to the investigation. Despite this, one of the employees managed to save at least one disc with the recordings. Interestingly, Barack Obama himself did not appear in these videos, but they did feature close friends and political allies from his administration, those who stood by him in power. According to Halperin, it was these recordings that could have been used as a tool of blackmail, with which Combs controlled influence and guaranteed his protection by forcing high-ranking officials to act in his interests. In the end, the trial ceased to be simply a case about the crimes of a music mogul. It turned into a large-scale exposé of a complex and deeply entrenched system of corruption, influence, and impunity. According to the prosecution, this system extends far beyond the entertainment industry and reaches the highest echelons of the U.S. government. Diddy Combs, hiding behind the image of a philanthropist and successful entrepreneur, actually ran a shadow empire. In this empire, fear and blackmail were common and effective tools for maintaining power and control over people. His political connections, including those who held important positions in the government, gave him almost complete immunity, turning him into a figure who could do anything. Thus, the case showed that behind the glittering facade of success and public recognition lay a complex web of influence and manipulation where law and justice gave way to personal interests and political games. This process made many people think about the true nature of power and how deep the shadows sometimes lurk in the brightest halls. A deep, almost palpable silence fell over the courtroom when Agent Halperin began to speak. His voice was calm, but every word penetrated the minds of those present, causing growing anxiety and a sense of impending doom. It seemed as if the atmosphere around them was thickening, and everyone understood that what was about to be said was something truly serious, far beyond the scope of an ordinary case. At the end of his speech, the agent made an important and frightening statement. He explained that Mr. Combs had not collected compromising videos simply to satisfy his ego or demonstrate his power. These materials served a much more pragmatic and sinister purpose. They were insurance, a reliable tool to protect himself from those who might try to eliminate him or hinder his influence. In other words, Combs understood that in a world where power and betrayal go hand in hand, one must have leverage to protect oneself. These recordings became his weapon, his guarantee of survival in a dangerous game where the stakes were too high and his enemies were too close. That same evening, news of Agent Halperin's speech spread instantly across major television networks and news agencies. The headlines were loud and the public response was huge. But behind closed doors in Washington and Los Angeles, far from the cameras and public attention, crisis teams were already gathering, immersed in discussion of the main question: how much and how deeply Diddy Combs really knew about the people, schemes, and secrets that could shake the very foundations of power. The next day, the court hearing resumed under heavy security. Federal marshals lined the walls of the courtroom, demonstrating the seriousness and tension of the situation. The atmosphere in the courtroom was filled with anxiety and a vague sense of foreboding, as if the shadow of impending events hung not only over this case, but beyond it. Everyone understood that this was no longer just a trial. It had become a symbol of the struggle against a powerful and hidden force that could change much in the country. Later, the special agent took the stand again, holding a sealed envelope in his hands. He asked the judge to open it in private, away from the eyes of the public and the jury. Inside was a secret memorandum from the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, which was unusual in itself, as documents of this level rarely appear in open court proceedings. The memo, dated 2012, was prepared by a senior CIA analyst and was titled Entertainment Assets, High-Risk Targets. It detailed the role and influence of key figures in the cultural and entertainment spheres who, according to intelligence, posed a potential threat or were tools of manipulation on the international stage. The agent said that as early as the mid-2000s, Mr. Combs was recognized not just as a famous artist, but as an influential figure in the cultural world, capable of influencing and controlling events from within. His connections extended far beyond show business. He was linked to arms dealers, offshore bankers, and intelligence agents from Eastern Europe and West Africa. All of this pointed to the fact that Diddy Combs was not just a public figure, but a key player in a complex and dangerous global network of influence and shadow operations. Although the CIA never officially recruited Diddy Combs, the agent explained that the agency carefully used his proximity to influential people and closed events as an important source of information. In other words, Combs was a kind of unwitting informant for them, a person through whom they could obtain valuable information about political and criminal circles without attracting unnecessary attention. Thanks to this position, Combs was practically allowed to operate without interference from the law. His crimes were either ignored or investigations were deliberately curtailed, as the CIA believed that the benefits of cooperation and access to information outweighed the risks associated with his methods. When the prosecutor asked directly whether the CIA had turned a blind eye to Combs' criminal activities, the agent replied in the affirmative. According to him, the agency did not approve of all the methods Combs used, but considered his activities useful and beneficial, and that was why it had decided not to interfere. The agent then presented the court with a carefully prepared accounting book, a notarized document confirming the authenticity of all entries. This book detailed money transfers through a chain of shell companies directly linked to the activities of Diddy Combs. Each transaction had its own recipients, including political consultants, lobbyists, and a figure in a mysterious human trafficking case that had somehow disappeared from the Justice Department's official case list. The essence was clear and harsh. Diddy Combs was not alone in his operations and crimes. He was a link in a large and well-funded network where every move was strictly controlled and directed. This network was not just involved in crime. It wielded influence, blackmail, and waged information warfare using money, connections, and secret agreements as weapons to achieve its goals. The prosecution thus showed that it was not just one man standing trial, but an entire system deeply embedded in the country's political and economic structures. Then the agent made a statement that seemed to freeze the air in the room. He revealed shocking news. One of Diddy's offshore accounts had been used to purchase classified information from a former National Security Agency (NSA) contractor who was already dead at the time. This news caused an instant uproar and commotion among those present. Whispers, glances, and confused looks filled the room. However, the judge quickly restored order, sternly calling everyone to attention and calm. Even lawyers accustomed to the most complex situations could not immediately understand how to respond to this information. It seemed to go beyond the scope of a normal court proceeding and opened the door to a world of shadows, espionage, and high stakes. This statement further reinforced the feeling that the case had gone far beyond the usual charges and that something much larger and more dangerous was unfolding in this courtroom. The agent went on to remind the court that Diddy had a so-called president's number, a special connection that, according to the prosecution, provided him with special protection. He recounted in detail the attempt to arrest Combs in 2014, which came after a high-profile scandal involving minors and foreign guests in the music industry. At that time, a search of his private jet was planned in Miami to gather evidence and arrest him. However, at the very last moment, the alarm was unexpectedly canceled. The reason was a call that lasted only 41 seconds coming from a secure line connected directly to White House advisors. It was someone from the Obama administration who called the Department of Homeland Security and effectively stopped the investigation. The case was quickly closed and Combs left the airport unharmed, without any consequences. Later, an even more curious coincidence came to light. Just 48 hours after that call, Diddy donated $500,000 to an organization linked to Obama's re-election campaign. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone was stunned by this apparent coincidence, which looked more like proof of close ties and support at the highest levels. The agent emphasized that his goal was not to directly accuse the former president, but to shed light on a broader and more disturbing picture. He explained that this was not just about the specific actions of Sean Diddy Combs, but about his unique position in society, which gave him access to resources, influence, and protection at the highest levels. Thanks to this position, according to the agent, Diddy was able to not only cover up the traces of possible crimes, but also put pressure on victims, forcing them to remain silent and not seek help. The agent noted that this case is not simply the exposure of one influential person, but part of a deeper and more systemic problem. It is a story about a power structure that encompasses the highest echelons of American society: show business, politics, law enforcement, and the media. Such a system, he said, often not only fails to notice abuses, but also unwittingly or deliberately contributes to their concealment by protecting those with status, money, and connections. The agent then presented a key element of the investigation, a 94-page dossier codenamed Project Phantom Room. According to him, this document was discovered in 2022 during a secret raid on a warehouse in Newark, New Jersey. In addition to the dossier itself, dozens of hard drives, hundreds of printed and digital photographs, and a separate folder with carefully sorted archival materials were found in the storage facility. Inside were video recordings from surveillance cameras installed in the VIP areas of elite nightclubs, as well as audio files obtained using hidden microphones. All of this material covered the period from 2004 to 2019, 15 years of carefully collected and systematized evidence. Of particular interest was the list of individuals mentioned in the archive. Among them were well-known producers, top managers of major music labels, influential artists, and at least 2 former White House aides. According to the agent, the data collected was not used for personal archives, but as a tool for exerting pressure. If an artist refused to sign a contract, or if a political favor was needed, Diddy, without resorting to direct threats, hinted at the existence of compromising material. The message was clear: submission in exchange for silence. According to investigators, this scheme turned the music industry into a system of covert coercion, disguised as business relationships and friendships. The agent cited one of the most telling episodes dating back to 2017. At that time, he said, a young and rapidly rising singer refused to participate in a private event organized by Diddy. Her decision caused a real stir behind the scenes. Despite her outward politeness, it was perceived as a challenge within the industry. Literally within a few weeks, rumors began circulating in the tabloids about problems in her personal life, allegedly difficult relationships with her management, and hints of unprofessional behavior. Shortly thereafter, it became known that the singer had signed a contract with a label affiliated with a distribution network controlled by Diddy. The archive materials presented by the investigation included an audio recording of the discussion of this deal. It mentioned initials that, according to agents, belonged to two powerful figures, one of whom was believed to have close ties to former President Barack Obama, and the other to the management of one of the largest recording studios in the US. Although no direct references or voices of Obama were found in the archives, investigators are considering the possibility that certain donations and political services may have been part of an unspoken agreement between elites. The agent emphasized that his job was not to make accusations, but to show how the system worked. Everything happened not openly or crudely, but gradually, step by step. He called it an architecture of influence, built through dozens of seemingly disparate agreements and manipulations. At the center of this structure was Diddy, who managed to connect the entertainment industry, politics, and business into an informal but effective network. This was not just a story about night parties and Hollywood glamour, but a chronicle of the creation of a shadow empire built on fear, connections, and carefully calculated pressure. On the 8th day of the court hearings, the atmosphere in the courtroom became even more oppressive. The agent approached the podium with a new folder containing confidential testimony, confessions from people who had refused to testify publicly. According to him, 26 people agreed to share their stories but were forced to remain anonymous due to threats, signed non-disclosure agreements, and fear for their own safety. One such testimony was the confession of a former choreographer. She said that at a party she was drugged and woke up with bruises and vague memories. When she tried to report this to management, she was immediately fired. Another case involved a 19-year-old model who was invited to Miami for a photo shoot. Upon arrival, he was deprived of his phone, placed in a location with video surveillance, and restricted in his movements. The most disturbing testimony came from an anonymous witness identified as CW11, who was only 17 at the time. He was introduced to Diddy under the guise of a mentoring program, but soon realized that behind the outward care lay a threat. If he tried to leave or tell anyone about what was happening, his family could be in danger. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. These people were not celebrities, they had no influence or public platforms, but it was their silence, dictated by fear, that allowed what was happening to continue for years. The agent showed the court a document, a list with names crossed out. They matched the dates and locations associated with events in Diddy's biography. The judge asked what the list meant. The agent replied briefly, "Confirmed victims." On the day the questioning ended, the agent presented a special document, a sealed transcript of a telephone conversation that took place in 2015 between Sean Combs and a representative of a large lobbying company. The conversation suggested that they had allegedly turned 5 counties to the Democrats, and Combs warned, "If I go down, others go down." These words pointed to something much more serious than show business or private parties. They were talking about direct influence on political processes, mobilizing voters, and possibly interfering in the election. A murmur rose in the courtroom. One of the jurors whispered, "Oh my God." The agent summed it up. Combs wasn't just paying for silence. He was investing in his own influence. His real currency wasn't money, it was votes. The judge called a recess. What began as a high-profile trial about abuse in the world of celebrities turned into a dark, disturbing chapter in modern American history, exposing corruption and secret mechanisms of power that had been accumulating for decades in the shadows. Only one question remained. How many names were still hidden on that blacklist?